Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's lecture on Introduction and Purpose Statements. This is loosely based on Creswell's chapter 5 and 6. So if you're interested, go to that PDF that I shared and look for chapter 5 and 6. While I try to be as concise as possible and hopefully breaking it down to things that are easily understood with some examples, I think the best way to make some of these points stick is for you to engage in various activities of going back to the articles that you found and using the criteria that I will introduce you to and critically look at that information. So you can do that either by going through the lecture and then pausing as appropriate, or going through the lecture all at once and then maybe coming back to some of the ideas for activity. Either way, let's go ahead and get started. And I encourage you to make this lecture to fit your own learning style, whatever that is. Okay, take care and let's go ahead and get started. Think back to studies you've read in the past week or other ones you've read in the past for courses or projects. What are the effective introductions that just draws you in, stand out almost immediately at first glance because it clearly convinces you this is an interesting topic or important one? Hook, line, and sinker can be a good imagery when you think about a narrative hook to a study. The aim is to pique your audience interest in the study, convey clearly what the problem is, and you can do that in the introduction by providing background information, structuring a framework where you're situating your story, yourself, within a larger landscape of the research field, and then relating it to the other research. If you have access to the articles you gathered last week for your literature review, go find them. You can use it to compare and contrast how effective each of their introduction and purpose statements are. As we go through the next few slides, I'll make the example much more concrete. For this slide, we'll talk about that idea of an abstract, which we've done in the past class when we last met. We talked about doing your own abstracts as you're reading through articles, essentially doing summaries of the articles you've read and abstracting the highlight. This word is often used also to describe that brief paragraph at the beginning of each research manuscript. For a lot of people, they say it's the most single important paragraph in the study because it allows the reader to quickly survey the essential elements of the study to see if it's relevant to what they're interested in. It starts with the issue, the research issue and the research problem, indicates the purpose of the study, and then it talks about how the data will be collected to address the purpose, maybe brief summary of themes if it's qualitative, statistical results if it's quantitative, and then I'll briefly include some practical implications of the study. Beyond the abstract, as you're reading your narrative hook or the first sentences of a study, look at the effect it has on the overall tone of the study in setting the scene. Would it entice you as a reader to read on? Is it pitched at a level where a wide range of audience can understand it? For the first paragraph, there are common ways and strategies to really have a punch and impact for the readers to be hooked. You can use numerical information, statistics about why this particular research problem is important, citing past research as to why this needs to be studied further. And this could be done by citing one or multiple problems, making your case why your study would contribute to further the field. There are various approaches in structuring that introduction. One of the popular common ones is called the deficiency model. This is done by stating the research problem, conducting a lit review, and then citing these studies that have addressed the problems in the past, and then you attack it and critique it by indicating the deficiencies in these studies. Examples of deficiencies could be this particular topic needs to be generalized further to underrepresented populations. It needs to have a cross cultural comparison. It needs a different component that has not been researched before. So essentially, you're reviewing the studies and then identifying the gap before you make that leap to make your case about why your particular study would contribute to the literature. And this is where your purpose statement comes in. Note that the literature review within the introduction is different from the full-blown overall literature review that you'll do later on. The literature review within the introduction is a brief summary where you're justifying the importance of your research problem. You're setting the research problem within that context of that ongoing dialogue within the literature. You're making clear distinctions between past studies and your proposed study. You're summarizing broad themes and categories, larger groups of the studies, instead of breaking it into individual ones. So, really, this is a brief summary to capture your reader's attention. As you're reading through your articles for your literature review, I'd really invite you to look at the discussion section, implication for practice, limitation, and future directions. So, the latter part after the statistical results, findings, or qualitative findings, really look at the discussion section because a lot of times that's where you can also look for deficiencies in past literature. And deficiency in literature exists because this topic hasn't been explored further with a particular group, sample, population. The study needs to be replicated with new people, new sites, or there might be voices of underrepresented groups that hasn't been heard in the published literature. If you're taking this deficiency model as a way to structure your introduction, you have a stronger case if you can cite multiple studies in the past who's been advocating for further study on a particular group or indicate really an area has been overlooked in past studies. Once you've addressed the deficiencies of past studies, this is also where you come in with your proposed study. This is where you offer remedies or how you will address the deficiencies and provide a unique contribution to the literature. After you've successfully set up the tone and the scene with your introduction, it's time to really sell and convince the reader why your study will make a difference. You can do that by giving them reasons how your study will contribute to the existing scholarly literature, how it will help inform and improve practice or policy making, or a combination of those. This is a good time to end with a purpose statement. A purpose statement is where you indicate the reasons why you want to do the study and what you intend to accomplish with your proposed study. Think about it as a central controlling idea pulling everything together so far. The purpose statement is written very concisely in one sentence or just several sentences. It sets the objective intent or the major idea of your proposal for your study. So it's not rehashing the introduction or the problem that's leading up to the study. And it's also not quite time yet to throw in your research hypothesis. In order to make this a little bit more clear, I think it's helpful to look at a couple of examples of purpose statements, either quantitative or qualitative. So let's go ahead and do that in the next couple of slides. So let's look at a script or generic template for writing qualitative purpose statements. It will start with the purpose of this, and then you will fill in the blank with whatever approach or strategy you're using. It could be an ethnography, case study, or other types of qualitative research, which we'll get to in a few weeks. But you will fill in the blank with that to start off with, and you would follow it by an action verb, depending on what you're interested in doing. Is it to describe, understand, develop a theory, examine the meaning, or discover how learning will take place? So you would describe the central phenomenon that you're wanting to be studied, followed by the participants and the research site. So participants can be an individual, it could be an organization. If I wanted to look at the Department of Psychology, that could be my participants, even though it's an organization. And you would specify your research site. And you would end this section by, at this stage of the research, you would give a brief definition and your interpretation of what your central phenomenon is. This is important, especially for a phenomenon that is not easily understood or has not been researched as much. It's important to really specify what you're wanting to study and examine further. And because a lot of times qualitative studies can be exploratory in nature, you could have a statement such as the purpose statement to acknowledge that the study may evolve into an exploration of relationships or comparison among ideas. But at this stage of research, this is what we've got. So let's look at a similar script, but this one is a generic one for quantitative purpose statements. So compare and contrast these two statements and notice what you see to be different. Some of the setup is very similar. You talk about the purpose of this, whatever design that you have, is to test out the theory of, if you have a theory, or it's to test out the relationship between various variables. So generally it will go into the direction of independent variable, so what you're wanting to manipulate or your intervention variable, to your outcome variable, which is your dependent variable, controlling for whatever variables. And then again, you would specify the participants at a particular research site. And then because we're not talking about central phenomenons anymore, quantitative research tends to be a little bit more concrete. You could specify the independent variable will be defined as whatever. The dependent variable will be defined as, and the controlling, intervening, mediating, whatever variables that might be going on, you would also spell that out and define them. And that would be your purpose statement. So in some ways, it's very similar, has similar format. It uses different language, but it tries to accomplish the same thing. Again, going back to why you're wanting to study, what you're wanting to study, and what you hope to accomplish. If you're feeling a little lost in regards to the various types of variables, I'm also linking a brief section to a chapter of a particular research textbook. Take a read of it. And if you have questions, we can talk about it in class further. In my experience and the experience of many others I've talked to, the best way to learn research is really just to dive in, face your fear, and take action. So for this week, I hope the lecture was useful. Use this as a guide and framework to really critically look at the articles that you already have. Just because someone is published doesn't mean their article is 100% perfect. Most likely it isn't. So I really encourage you to look at particularly the narrative hooks, how they've maybe set up the literature within the introduction, if you feel like they've taken a deficiency model. If not, how did they set up their introduction and how effective was it? Take a look at the script of their purpose statement. Did they use that generic template or did they have their own spin to it? Compare and contrast, see how effective they were at convincing you that their studies would contribute to the literature. So I know we're still in a very early stage of you gathering data, formulating your topic, and we will come to your research questions and hypotheses next week when we do the class online. But for this week, I'd really encourage you to maybe try and put together a narrative hook for your proposed study already. Like, what's significant about the topic that you're trying to study? Why should people care about it? Maybe start writing a purpose statement, even if you don't know what research methodology or design you'll use. You can talk about what population that you're interested in studying. Start filling in some of the blanks. Look at the discussion section, just as I suggested when we were going through the deficiency model. What have researchers who have published in the area that you're interested in suggested for more research to be done on in the future? So take a look at that. We'll reconvene in class and debrief and take some more action. So I hope everybody is doing well. I will see y'all soon. Take care.